continuing on in our voyage into the Founding Fathers' writings, documents, and history. Today, we're going to talk about the Articles of Confederation, but we're going to talk about it a little bit through the lens of the letters to and from Founding Fathers to each other. We're going to talk about the issues of the lack of ability to control and to run a government when you're faced with a democracy. We're also going to be looking at the issue of the Russo-Ukraine war and why some folks are a little bit upset that it's going to end, and why we as Americans really should be focused on the ending of that war. And it is serious. A lot of people are missing the real threat that the Russo-Ukraine war poses to the United States. And again, in popular culture, we have J.D. Vance facing off with the Pope on the Order of Love. Who would have thought that that would have been on your 2025 bingo card? We're going to talk about the first Congresswoman, and Nikki Knows Facts. We're also going to be starting a new segment today. We're calling it the Book Corner. If you have not read C.S. Lewis, he is a fantastic resource. We're going to be going through The Great Divorce and kind of just walking through it. If you want to read along at home, this week we read chapters 1 and 2 in addition to the foreword, and we'll dig into it. So all of that today on Further Every Day. Howdy, John Arthur Fiala for Further Every Day, and I'm joined here by Miss Nikki and Steve. Charlie's coming. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm all right. How has your week been?
You know, it was a good week. It was busy, but not stressful. Not too stressful, anyway.
That's a good week.
Yeah.
And Steve and Charlie is going to be filling the chair of culture in a little bit. Yours truly sitting in the chair of philosophy, Miss Nikki in the chair of theology. However, Mr. Charlie is a little bit late. He will be here. He had a previous engagement. Steve in the chair of politics. How's it going, sir?
It is going fantastic, dude. And I can see some politically incorrect things happening today.
Ooh. You're always politically incorrect.
Man, I know that's right.
All right. So, and Rai, the producer guy in the producer's chair. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Glad to have you there. Now, let's go ahead and start to dig into the Articles of Confederation. Now, these were founded as an emergency act in 1777, immediately after the Declaration of Independence. We kind of had to get something going. And of course, the interests or factions of all the different states were at play. So where we ended up was this constrained, very much a democracy of states, where you had 13 states. You had to have a supermajority of 9 to ratify anything that was going to be passed through the federal government, such as it stood, if you could even call it a federal government. This is what, cut one, Mr. Producer, this is what your Articles of Confederation look like. Through the eyes of the Founding Fathers, what exactly did the Articles of Confederation look like? Well, there were some serious concerns. It took until 1781 to actually ratify the Articles of Confederation. Yeah. So they were proposed in 1777. It took until 1781 to actually ratify them. And I believe it was Rhode Island that was the last one to ratify. So all that to say, it started off in this very temporary framework to maintain the safety and the integrity of this new nation. So very, very interesting that we started this. However, immediately we start to see the government falling apart. In the 1780s, we see Shays' Rebellion, the Newburgh Conspiracy, because the government is not able to effectively levy taxes and create money. They're not able to print and mint money effectively. So what did this look like through the lens of the Founding Fathers? Well, James Madison, on cut 2, Mr. Producer, if you would, laid it out like so. He says, "It is no longer doubted that a unanimous and punctual obedience of the 13 bodies to the acts of the federal government ought not to be calculated on. You couldn't count on the federal government. Even during the war, when external danger supplied in some degree the defect of legal and coercive sanction, however imperfectly did the states fulfill their obligations to the Union. In time of peace, we already see what is to be expected." There was a very real threat that the Brits were going to come back and burn down our White House. Oh, wait, they did. And so we really needed a strong government. And what do we see today? We see the exact same thing. We see a United States that is broken up between left and right. And we see this cry for democracy. I really, really think that the more things change, the more they stay the same. In Federalist 30, again, speaking to the Articles of Confederation, cut 3 rather, Alexander Hamilton wrote this. He said, "The present Confederation, feeble as it is intended to repose in the United States, an unlimited power of providing for the pecuniary wants, the monetary wants of the Union. But proceeding upon an erroneous principle, it has," lost my place here, "it has been done in such a manner as to entirely have frustrated the intention. Congress, by the articles which compose that compact, as have already been stated, are authorized to ascertain and call for any sums of money necessary, in their judgment, to the service of the United States, and their requisitions, if conformable to the rule of apportionment, or are in any constitutional sense obligatory upon the states." So basically he's saying there is a obligation to provide for the federal. But he goes on later to say further in Federalist 30, he says this. He says, "These have no right to question the propriety of the demand, no discretion beyond that of devising the ways and means of furnishing the sums demanded. But though this be strictly and truly the case, though the assumption of such right would be an infringement on the Articles of the Union, though it may seldom or never have been avowedly claimed, yet in practice it has been constantly exercised and will continue to be so as long as the revenues of the Confederacy should remain dependent on the intermediary agencies of its members." That is some very, very great writing from some very illiterate farmers, scare quotes here. These guys are saying we can't count on the states to get the taxation money we need to run the government. And right now it's different because we have set up this federal government, but the same polls, the same weighing on the republic is occurring, because you see California spending all of this money for illegal aliens, for entitlements, for people who haven't put any money in the system, and then they go to the government for a bailout.
Right.
It's the same polls, and there's a reason why we have the federal in place, why there is an executive branch and a judicial branch, because they only had the congressional branch, as we'll see in just a moment. That was their big concern. Washington, next cut, said this about the federal government at the time: "Requisitions are actually little better than a jest and a byword throughout the land. If you tell the legislatures that they have violated the treaty of peace and invaded the prerogatives of the Confederacy, they will laugh in your face." But what do we see today?
Well, yeah. Why is California and brave enough to say we're not going to honor the executive order by the president? We're going to Trump-proof our state. Yep. By the way, Harris County, here where we live, they have just approved that they can take legal action against Trump and his executive orders for the next 6 months. I don't know the person who applied for that, what the title of it is, but I know it was approved.
So, again,
his personal title is what I'm saying.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. You're seeing that you actually have a reversion, and again, we'll talk about Lewis more later. But you see this cry for quote unquote democracy, and you see this desire for everyone to have their own say. Well, if you do not have a leader, someone once said this way about marriage. You say, you have to have a head. You have two heads, you have a monster. You have one head, you have a functioning organism. You have a head and you have a body, right? And so you have the one who does the ultimate talking and the other one that does all of the support. We needed a leadership structure. We needed a leadership structure of a sort. And again, you see that, next slide, the existing Confederacy, this is from the Constitutional Convention, this is James Madison saying, "The existing Confederacy does not sufficiently provide against this evil. The proposed amendment to it does not supply the omission. It leaves the will of the states as uncontrolled forever." Speaking to the issue of lack of executive branch. And what do we see being attacked right now? The executive branch.
Yeah.
So again, this is why I thought about doing John Adams' letter to his wife Abigail today, because we're going to be talking about the first female Congresswoman, and some of the interesting peculiarities with that. But we'll save that for another day. I think that this is still very, very relevant. Next slide, please, Mr. Producer. Also said in Federalist number 20 by Alexander Hamilton, several states have endeavored by separate prohibitions, restrictions, and exclusions to influence the conduct of that kingdom in this particular. But the want of concert arising from the want of a general authority, an executive branch, and from clashing and dissimilar views within the states has hitherto frustrated every experiment of this kind, attempting to build a good state, and will continue to do so as long as the same obstacles to a uniformity of measures continue to exist. The purpose of the three-branch government is to provide a head to this monster. And what do we see? As soon as that head starts to move against the deep state, it's a huge problem. Everyone's crying out.
You know, I think it's funny because what we're talking here about the congressional power and the states, you know, wanting to do their own thing and needing to have a federal government. But yet, look at our history. Haven't we always been in a struggle? The Civil War was taking more, I mean, we say it's about slavery, but there was a lot of it about, wait a minute. We don't want the federal government coming in and telling us this.
Yep.
And then we have what's going on right now with California and some other states that are fighting against the executive branch. But then, and I agree, sometimes I think the states are right to say, you're taking too much power. I'm sorry. That's not good for our state. So it's really a tug of war that we have seen since the beginning of this country.
Yep. And I've noticed the states' rights issue kind of gets bantered about back and forth. There is, I'm a firm believer in states' rights, but I've noticed that whenever the left attempts to use states' rights, it's for Jim Crow, it's for abortion, it's for slavery, it's for taking your money to take minors and permanently castrate them. Mm-hmm. It's always about states' rights when it comes to the state being protected while it is enforcing the liberal worldview onto people who are not capable of resisting: small children, infants in the womb, slaves. Gun control, which, by the way, again, was a Democrat tactic originally to go after the blacks and then after the Italians. The reason we have a National Firearms Act was the blacks and the Italians. They didn't want those of African-American descent, they used other words, to be able to own guns. And, of course, the stinky, smelly gangster Italians had their scary weapons. And so that was, it's always about taking away someone else's ability. Whenever the left is using states' rights as an argument, it's always to consolidate power in one spot to take away one of your inalienable rights. So, kind of scary, and also it's predictable. Next slide, Mr. Producer. So, again, in Federalist number 22, Alexander Hamilton said this, speaking towards the Articles of Confederation: a circumstance which crowns the defects of the Confederation remains yet to be mentioned, the want of a judiciary power. Laws are a dead letter without courts to expound and define their true meaning and operation. The treaties of the United States, to have any force at all, must be considered as parts of the law of the land. Their true import, as far as respects individuals, must, like all other laws, be ascertained by judicial determinations. To produce uniformity in these determinations, they ought to be submitted, in the last resort, to one supreme tribunal. This is where you're seeing the Supreme Court. And this tribunal ought to be instituted under the same authority which forms the treaties themselves. These ingredients are both indispensable. Yet what do we see happening with the courts? We see, again, this push, and thank God that Trump got in this last time, because if he hadn't, they would have done what to the court system?
Well, the object was to stack the court for the liberal agenda. I'm not sure how much support he would have gotten for that if he could have done it. But the court system is another thing that the left and the right battle over. Who we're going to put in charge and how they interpret the law. It was intended that they would interpret the law with the same mindset, but we're seeing that that's not the case.
Correct.
Yeah, and one of the problems that we're seeing in courts is that judges instituting law from the bench.
Yep.
Which is not right, because laws are only made by Congress, period. Not by judges, not by bureaucrats, not by presidents, by Congress.
So I don't want to get off topic, but I want to go out and ask you this question.
Sure.
This week with the judges and, well, not just this week, but since Trump took office, how judges are trying to interfere and say, okay, well, we're going to, you cannot put a freeze on spending. You have to give those funds.
If they're executive funds, the judicial needs to bowl out. They have no ability to speak to an executive set of funds. If Trump was saying, I have, so let me give you a hypothetical where a judge should be able to rule against an executive spending decision, right? It's when it's not an executive spending decision. If Donald J. Trump took funding that was approved by a congressional, vote and said, I am going to spend this congressional vote of money over here, then Trump would be stepping outside of his authority. And the way it's supposed to work is the congressional is supposed to sue via the judicial to check the executive.
Okay.
So all three are involved in the check and balance. In this case, the judicial is the fulcrum between the two, and it's the mediator. So that's what the judicial is supposed to do. The judicial, what they're saying is, we are going to sue you, President Trump, for doing something within your executive powers, because what you're doing is not constitutional, or it's not permissible, it's not allowable under what law? And so what they're doing is they're determining without a plaintiff in some cases, without someone complaining, that Trump has stepped outside of the boundaries of his authority, and they're saying, we are going to act as an executive judicial branch and step in and check your side. The thing is, the executive branch has the ability to spend money and then reallocate resources that are already within their power. So far as I know, that's the only stuff that DOJ has touched.
Right. And like you were saying, the judicial branch cannot act on its own to do something, to file suit against, say, Donald Trump. If he's doing something against the law,
they have to have a plaintiff, a complaint.
Correct. They got to have somebody, say, like John Arthur, to be a plaintiff to sue Donald Trump. The judicial branch just can't go.
Can't do it.
Hey, I'm a judge and I'm going to sue you. No.
But I think they did have somebody that filed.
Some of them might have plaintiffs, yes.
So now here's something. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Go for it.
Just a moment.
This is an apologetic channel.
So,
that's a good thing.
Okay. So if those funds had been promised, are they under contract of some sort?
That's a good question.
Okay. If the judge is saying, listen, you have a contract, you need to honor your contract. I can see that. But at the same time, what DOJ is trying to do is to make sure that those contracts, because, Donald Trump and those people know that that money was going to places that had no business going there. That's why they were going in there. But if it's like to a soup kitchen in Haiti, that's a good place, and I don't want them to get their money. But I think what DOJ was trying to say is we're only freezing stuff to make sure that it's going to go to the right places.
There's two or three things happening. Carolyn Levitt actually spoke to this, the press secretary, and she said, and I don't have that clip ready because we're kind of a little bit off script, but that's cool. This is a good conversation. She said, we're specifically going after funds that were allocated to places that were wasteful and fraudulent, things that the United States government should not have been in the first place. So there are contracts where they're saying, you knew what you were doing when you requisitioned trans surgeries in, Malaysia, you're not getting any more money. So there are contracts that they are cutting, and they were with the Biden admin. The Trump admin is either not renewing them or they are freezing the funds as fraud. And so they actually have the right to say this was fraudulent misspending under the executive branch. They have the ability to do that.
And the executive branch was signing off on these contracts and saying, hey, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give this money. Now, Trump can go in and go, oh, Biden signed off and said we're going to give them money. Guess what? I'm the executive, and I rescind that. I rescind and cancel that.
That was
because
wasteful.
I'm the executive now.
Okay, I don't want to pose here, but who the president had to sign off on sending money to Hamas under the guise of contraception. Sure. Now, does anybody?
It turns out that it wasn't that Gaza. It was another Gaza.
But
still,
was it to Hamas?
It wasn't to Hamas. It was to Gaza, but it was Gaza in the. Mr. Producer, look up which country, you know what? Don't worry about it. I'm not going to bother you. It was one of those African countries. There was another Gaza. Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
But keep going. Keep going.
Okay, so that makes a whole difference because I'm thinking to myself, Hamas has kidnapped some. Yeah, you're aiding the enemy. Somebody should be accountable for that.
It doesn't make a huge difference. The biggest issue is that it was money that was fraudulently obtained through the largesse of the American people, and the president has the right to say that these are exterior countries. They don't have anywhere but world court to go. Good luck in world court.
Yeah, we're not going to pay attention to world court. Sorry.
Right. Sucks to be you. Moving on. Sorry.
It must conversation there.
It must suck to suck. I'm sorry. So moving on, inability to regulate commerce. And again, we're seeing this in America. And this is going to be cut number 9, Mr. Producer. Okay, this is George Washington in his letter to James Madison wrote this. I hope resolutions which were published for the considerations of the House respecting the reference to Congress for the regulation of a commercial system will have passed. We want we want ability to do interstate trade, is what George Washington is saying. The proposition, in my opinion, is so evident that I confess I am at a loss to discover wherein lies the weight of the objection to the measure. We are either a united people or we are not. If the former, let us in all matters of general concern act as a nation, which have national objects to promote and national character to support. If we are not, let us no longer act a farce, man, it sounds like today, by pretending to do it. For whilst we are playing a double game or playing a game between two, we never shall be consistent or respectable, but may be the dupes of some powers and most assuredly the contempt of all. We see that today. We see that we have an issue with why do you think that the number one manufacturer of electric vehicles had to move from California to Texas?
Oh, he did it because of the laws that were I think it was anti-family.
Anti-family.
And then the taxation and the requirements, they do not promote good business.
Correct.
They don't promote good business. And business is like, hey, I'm just going to go someplace else where I can have an easier time promoting my business without the burden.
Correct. Correct. So very, very, very concerning that we're starting to see like a slow slide of that. And the reason why I think that we see this huge pull back and forth is we have this unnatural tug from this deep state, if you will, this group of people who do not believe as we do. They have this idea of what America and what the world should be, this new world order, dare I say. And they're pulling at us with all of these lies. Right now, in this time and place, you know, I was privileged to speak in front of a group of men recently at a morning Bible study, and I said, guys, we're living in unprecedented times. People are looking for the answers to truth. We have the Pope and the Vice President debating the orders of love in the public square right now. Like, and by the way, the Vice President is the conservative wing of that. Just think about the world that we're living in right now. We have a chance to root out this evil from our land if only we're going to be faithful enough to do it on an individual level. And you know what's
interesting is the Pope says the Pope has a guy that speaks for him.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
That was so interesting.
We'll get to that. It's going to be great.
Man, you're not kidding.
Next slide, Mr. Producer, if you will. Again, so this is at the Constitutional Convention. Washington said this: "It is too probable that no plan we propose will be adopted." Again, because you had to have a supermajority ratification. Get rid of the filibuster, by the way. "Perhaps another dreadful conflict is to be sustained. If to please the people we offer that we ourselves disapprove, how can we afterwards defend our work? Let us raise a standard to which the wise and the honest can repair. The event is in the hands of God." You know, we've been missing that sort of clarity. Two things. He's recognizing God first and foremost. Second, Washington is laying out, you can't have a nation that is this divided. And by the way, they really believed, I don't think they ever conceived of a multicultural America. And they conceived of a melting pot of people, but they never considered a segmented, cordoned off group of people. They thought that it was hard enough just to get a group of Anglicans, Baptists, Quakers, Catholics together. They didn't think that they never imagined that we would have, well, they did imagine, and they were concerned if we had Muslims and Jews running the country. And I need to be careful how I say that because people are going to make assumptions. I'm saying they literally said, their words, a Mohammedan or Jew could run the nation, but the problem is the character of the nation will change. They were incredibly isolationist in a good way, because they knew that the Judeo-Christian ethic was the only one that was going to work. And again, they had a lot less against Jews. They had a lot more against the Muslim pirates that they were fighting in Tripoli. If you ever wonder where the Marine Corps lyric for the anthem comes from, "To the shores of Tripoli," it's because they were fighting the Muslim pirates. Right. And so they really had a different view of America and the way that this would all work out. What's sad is that unfortunately we've kind of given up our Christian heritage, and I think it's been a serious downfall.
You know, a lot of sea battles that went on were against Muslim pirates.
Muslim pirates, absolutely. So, next slide, if you would, Mr. Producer. Just making a case here for those of you just joining us on the Articles of Confederation from the Founding Fathers, why a democracy doesn't work. So this is at the Constitutional Convention, James Madison. The Confederation was founded on the temporary principles. It cannot last. It cannot be governed. Again, this is a democracy, and this is what they're speaking to. If we do not establish a good government on new principles, we must either go to ruin or have the work to do over again. We'll have to fight for liberty again. The people at large are wrongly suspected of being adverse to a general government. The aversion lies among the interested men who possess their confidence. What, in modern day terms, people who are saying you want to have a strong government with a central leader and you're afraid of a Republican form of government, these are people who were playing the special interest game. And what do we see today? We see 100% the same special interests, and they're looking to dismantle the Electoral College. The only reason we don't hear about that right now is because we won the popular vote. Yeah. Otherwise, you'd be hearing about dismantling the Republican form of government on CNN, on drip like an IV every single day.
Mm-hmm. Oh, boy, it'd be every hour you'd hear it.
It would be nonstop.
Correct.
Nonstop. So we've tried this before. We've tried to get rid of the Electoral College before by not having it. Okay, so I understand that's backwards, but you understand what I'm saying. We've tried the experiment. We have attempted this, and it did not work. It did not work well. Instead, thankfully, we actually have a mandate from the people to do a good job. Now, Benjamin Franklin, just wrapping up, when he's talking about the Constitution, he's just coming out of the Articles of Convention, okay? And he's talking about the Constitution that's being proposed. Thus I consent, sir, to this Constitution because I expect no better and because I am not sure that it is not the best. we have a superior system. These are men who studied empires, they studied republics, and they studied democracies. And by the way, most of these men, Ben Franklin, I think Jefferson, and one or two others aside, most of these men were in their 20s.
I don't know. I thought they were just a bunch of dumb farmers.
They're a bunch of old, dumb farmers with their
and
white
all
wigs.
they did was just sit around and drink beer.
No, most of these were 20 and 30-year-old men who were, some of them were teenagers. And when all of this was going down.
It's interesting because Benjamin Franklin, I mean, that statement, it wasn't like he was going, yes, this is the only way, this is the only way. They were really struggling to make the decision what was best for the country. And do you know that Benjamin Franklin said when they finalized this will be good for about 200 years, and then you'll have people rise up.
He was concerned.
He was, and he should be, and he's right.
When a people find that they can vote themselves money, that is when you will see the end to a democracy.
Yes.
And thankfully we have a republic, but unfortunately we see that ever constant draw towards democracy. So just from the Founding Fathers' own words, that's our quick breakdown of the articles. We could have gone through the articles, but I thought that this was much more interesting to go through some of the letters that were written back and forth to see exactly what they saw wrong with a democratic government. Because we've tried that. It didn't work. We tried socialism. We tried it at Jamestown in 1907, or 1907, geez, 16, help me out here. In the 1600s, we tried it in Jamestown, and we also tried it at Plymouth Rock. Neither one worked.
1602.
Is it 1602? Did you look it up? You're killing me. You're killing me. If you're going to give me about, you got to look it up too. I love you, Mr. Producer. You are the best. So any thoughts on the articles before we move on? I know Charlie would have thoughts.
He always has thoughts.
Okay.
I do. I just want to say, I think it's important that you stop and you realize we live in a very comfortable society. We have communication very quickly, right? Mm-hmm. We can move around the country very quickly. We can call each other. We can do email. We can do it lightning fast. They were living in a very primitive world, and war to them was, I think, heavier on their mind than it is with us. In America, we usually fight our wars, most of history is taught, on somebody else's land.
Well, that was paid for in blood. That privilege was paid for in American blood.
But the struggle, I think the realization when George Washington is going to bed at night and he's thinking, this could fall apart easily. This really could fall apart. And the strain and the stress of wondering, are we going to make it? Are we going to make it? Are we going to make it? Just stop and think about that. Mm-hmm. Leave your world and go back to that primitive world to see what was going on in the minds and the hearts of those men. So
this is from the comment section here. By the way, if you're one of our regular, further everyday listeners, been with us for a long time, we are now on PSB. Thank you, PSB. So we are airing these live on Sundays, 1 p.m. Central. And you can join the chats over at Rumble for PSB, DLive, or Vaughn.live, whatever your favorite is. We are reading the chats. This comes from Melissa Perry's. We have to understand that their education was far superior to ours. You know why? Because they used the King James Bible as a primer, and they also focused on social studies that were not socialized studies. They were focused on Hobbes, on John Locke, all of these really, really wonderful writers. They actually read Greek and Roman poetry. She goes on to say that many spoke or understood Latin or Greek. Absolutely correct. So, by the way, I'm not a King James only guy, but I do daily drive the King James. I think starting your child, you can start your child in that. I was started in that. The Founding Fathers were started in that. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's a decent translation. It's one of the better ones out there. Sometime we'll have to do a discussion on translations, but pretty good stuff. So they were a different breed of people, and I think we kind of forget that, and we've lost a lot as Americans. But moving on to the Russo-Ukrainian War. Mm-hmm. Now, there's been a lot of consternation from the folks like John Bolton, Lindsey Graham, a lot of the neocon Republicans, and a lot of Democrats. Whenever you see the middle of the road Republicans and the Democrats lining up on an issue, you should be concerned. And by the way, I take this advisedly as someone who is pro-Israel. Some people would call me a Zionist. I don't know if that fits in your term. If you call me a Zionist, I think that they have the right to live, they have the right to exist. If you don't agree with the way that the treaties were all signed and the way the Brits handled things at the end of the war, we can disagree on, agree or disagree on that. But they exist right now. But I did have an issue when I saw Lindsey Graham and Joe Biden both supporting Israel. I was like, wait a minute. What? Why are those strange bedfellows
supporting
Israel? Why was Joe Biden supporting the war in Gaza and Lindsey Graham? And it turns out there's a ton.
Something weird is going on.
Something weird is going on. Because, again, that's not key for the Democrat Party. So, in general, I support Israel. In general, I think it's not a bad idea to arm and aid a good actor in that theater. But my radar was up, right? When I see Lindsey Graham and Joe Biden, my radar was up with Ukraine and Russia. It's like, why are all these people on the same boat? So it just led to a moment of caution. Whenever you see them all lining up, there's something weird going on. And we're now seeing it with Doge. Millions, billions of dollars of waste. There is an estimated, and usually we provide sources immediately. I forgot to put this in there. Zelensky is saying that there are tens, if not even as much as 100 billion missing in aid that was supposed to go to the Ukraine. In a lot of cases, these weapons are
Is that missing on his part or missing on our part?
That's a good question.
Did it get to him or did it not get to him?
That's a good question, because it's not actually being seen in the war effort. And so Zelensky has brought that forward. So there's something very, very wrong in a lot of these politicians who are multi-millionaires. They are how many figures? 9-figure millionaires, some of them, 8-figure millionaires. I have a question. How did all of that aid not get to Ukraine or to Israel? And then how is it that we have hundreds of billions of dollars you spent, and there are things missing on the front lines? There are now there's rumors of a lot of American war materials, rockets, missiles, missing on these fronts. So how does that happen that you have an American contractor supposed to deliver, or an American, and all of a sudden, somewhere in the shuffle, you lose an ATACMS rocket?
I'm waiting, and he's ready to go.
Yeah,
Steve, jump in.
No, I was just going to answer a question that you asked a little bit early when you was concerned about Lindsey Graham and Biden being on the same page, for Israel. And I was going to say that, rats always leave a sinking ship.
True.
So there's a sinking ship over here. They're going to jump on the lifeboat, which is Israel. There's ships over here that are sinking, which are what Doge is getting into.
Yep.
So they're finding out all of this stuff. So what are they going to do? They're jumping off those sinking ships, and they're getting onto the life raft, which is Israel. Right? Because if you're sending money to Israel,
yep.
What does everybody like? Everybody likes Israel.
Sure.
Oh, I don't know.
It can be political, but I think
most of the people that voted for Trump would say, "Hey, we need to do stuff for Israel. We need to support Israel."
But you had a lot of people that were coming out against support. I don't think.
But
I'm sorry, John Arthur. I know you're ready to jump in here, but I just don't think. I don't think
look on his face
that Biden was supporting Israel as strongly as what he should have.
I think he should have supported Ukraine and Israel or not. And when I mean support, I mean you have full deployment of what you need. Like the first tank tread that crossed the Russo-Ukraine line should have been a hailfire missiled, and said
should have been blown up.
If you cross this line, I'm going to hold a strong line. I'm going to be strong here, and I'm going to hold this or not. but this proxy war nonsense is exactly that. It is monkey business to be able to move money back and forth. Now, Zelensky, noticing that, the facts on the ground are Trump is not happy about this and things are not going well for Zelensky. So if you can pull up that quote, Zelensky and VP Vance.
We had a number of fruitful conversations.
Okay. I mean, I'm ready for it. Go ahead, Mr. Producer, but just turn it down a little bit. Turn it down the mixer. Thank you. Go ahead.
We had a number of fruitful conversations, a number of things for us to follow up and work on. And fundamentally, the goal is, as President Trump outlined it, we want the war to come to a close. We want the killing to stop, but we want to achieve a durable, lasting peace, not the kind of peace that's going to have Eastern Europe in conflict just a couple years down the road. So we had a number of good conversations about how we might accomplish that together, and certainly we'll have many more in the days, weeks, and months to come. President Zelensky.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Very briefly, I think Vice President said everything absolutely correct. We are very thankful for American support. President Trump, we have good conversation today. Our first meeting, not last, I'm sure, and really what we need to speak more, to work more, and to prepare the plan how to stop Putin and finish the war. We want peace very much, but we need real security guarantees, and we will continue our meetings and our work, and we will be very happy to see General Kalak also in Ukraine in this closest time. Thank you, Vice President, for meeting. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much.
So all of that to say, Zelensky, I do love how he kisses up to Biden and then he kisses up to Trump. And, if Kamala had been it, he'd be just as happy. He's very much a character that kind of moves. By the way, he's canceled all
kissing up. He's kissing up.
He's a suck up. That's what that is. Sucking up.
Okay.
Right?
Yep.
That's what that is.
I don't want to know what the implication of what that was up to, but we'll just keep moving.
We'll
just keep moving.
Get it right there, and I'll let it go at that.
Yeah. So all of that to say, he is kind of a slippery fellow. But then you consider the fact that he has canceled all elections in his country. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a pro Putin guy, but I'm not also. Can I be not pro Putin, and can I also be not really pro Zelensky either? Can I think that the guy is basically a dictator who has embezzled hundreds of millions of dollars and potentially wasted a lot of American resources? I mean, I some people think that that's like an unpopular position. You have to love one or the other. Can we just not deal with them?
It's interesting because I would think that if you're giving millions of dollars, there's got to be some sort of accountability. And we can't run a business. I cannot. Each of us have a job. And in that business, if you don't have accountability for how the money is spent, where the money is going, you're not going to stay in business. And so we're finding out all this money that's being sent to all these people, but where's the accountability that it really went there? That it was really used for that purpose? Or are they just writing a check?
And the thing is, we see that the oligarchy has a direct tie to, let me rephrase that, a direct downstream to the Biden crime family and all of these other interests and entities. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Doge finds out. I think that a lot of these people are concerned that the gravy train is ending for them and their friends. And I think it's a serious issue.
I think you're hit the nail on the head with that one, buddy.
And so I don't know if y'all had a chance to watch Pete Hegseth, Secretary Hegseth's NATO speech, but I really think that it was enlightening. And a lot of the left is coming and saying, oh, well, Hegseth is ultimately abandoning NATO and he's abandoning Ukraine. And, he's a kind of just giving up. What will American promises mean in the future? Well, if you make a promise to an American president, or you get promises from an American president, rather, who's involved in a crime family, it's probably not a good idea to bank on that. Just saying Joe Biden's probably not a great bet for you. I think Hegseth starts a really, really good discussion here when asking, look, are you leaving NATO behind? And are you leaving Ukraine behind? Is there any chance for a negotiation? If you could pull up that cut, Mr. Producer, it's 14.
Given the position you've now staked out, what leverage exactly is Ukraine being left with, especially if the U.S. also plans to wind down its military aid? And then quickly, if a NATO ally is attacked by Russia or any country, will the U.S. unequivocally uphold its obligations under Article 5, regardless of that country's...
Well, we've said we're committed to the alliance, and that's part of the alliance, right? You point out Article 5, you point out Article 3. It's just a cheap... I'm not saying it's cheap coming from you.
He's Axios.
But it's just a cheap political point to say, oh, we've left all the negotiating cards off the table by recognizing some realities that exist on the ground. President Zelensky understands the realities on the ground. President Putin understands the realities on the ground. And President Trump, as a deal maker, as a negotiator, understands those dynamics as well. By no means is anything that I state here, even though we lead the most powerful military in the world, hemming in the commander-in-chief in his negotiations to ultimately decide where it goes or does not go. Well, he's got all the cards he would like. And the interesting part is oftentimes while the conventional status quo mindset or the legacy media wants to play checkers, the same checkers game we've been playing for decades, President Trump, time and time again, finds a way to play chess. As a deal maker, as a businessman who understands how to create realities and opportunities where they otherwise may not exist. Take, for example, the conversations that our Treasury Secretary had in Kiev recently with President Zelensky, which will continue in Munich with our Vice President and Secretary of State around investments and resources inside Ukraine. I don't want to get ahead of any decision or announcement that could be made there. It could be any number of parameters. But President Trump, as a deal maker and a businessman, recognizes that an investment relationship with Ukraine, ultimately in the long term for the United States, is a lot more tangible than any promises or shared values we might have, even though we have them. There is something to relationships and deals in real ways, whether militarily or economically or diplomatically, that he sees that are possibilities that could forge together a lot of opportunities to show that solidarity that Vladimir Putin will clearly recognize. That's one of any number of other opportunities that this president will leverage in these high-stakes negotiations. So I just reject on its face the premise that somehow President Trump isn't dealing with a full set of cards when he's the one that can determine ultimately what cards he holds.
Given the position you've now
Thank you, Mr. Producer.
What...
So just again, and we're going to get back to that. That is the NATO hearing in Brussels this last week. Again, coming from an apologetics standpoint, again, this is just a great response from Hegseth. He says, "I reject your premise." You know, when people say, you know, they say, "Oh, well, you believe in your spaghetti monster God." It's like, no, I reject your premise that it's irrational to believe in a God, right? I reject your premise that President Trump is leaving Ukraine behind by saying there are certain realities that you've got to face. We started a war. We had a chance to end the war, and we've dragged this war out. Yeah. And by the way, America and Ukraine might have been potentially colluding, allegedly, with biochem labs on Ukrainian soil. Like, there's some weird stuff that was going on. I don't know what is true and what's not, but there's a lot of interesting data. So is Trump abandoning Ukraine? I don't think so. So, by the way, Charlie's finally here. He's going to come on over. He's like looking. He's like, do I come in?
When should I do it?
Do I come not?
Out the right cut to come in.
He's trying to know if he.
I'm like wandering around like a.
So he's late.
Something
so
with my head cut off.
For those who don't know, this is the Charlie. How's the Charlie today?
I am good.
So we're just talking
Good
about.
to see you, sir.
Good to be here.
We're just talking about Pete Hegseth's discussion at NATO in Brussels. And basically, they're coming forward and they're saying, look, you're abandoning NATO. He says, no, we didn't say we're going to abandon NATO. Early in the speech, he literally says, guys, we support NATO and we support a strong NATO, a strong European Union. And this is a problem because you guys have not done a good job of protecting yourselves, which goes into our next clip. If you could pull that one up, Mr. Producer, he goes in.
Uno momento.
Hair trigger. He goes in with this, the German correspondent for the German news comes in and says, hey, if you are going to say that we need to raise our expenditures to 5% as the European Union for our own defense, what an entitled prig. Can't America raise their GDP expenditure to 5% of their GDP expenditure? First off, we're a lot bigger than you. Let's hear from Pete Hegseth. I think this is great.
To our allies, but without burden sharing, without creating the right set of incentives for European countries to invest, then we would be forced to attempt to be everywhere for everybody all the time, which in a world of fiscal restraints is, again, to get back to that word reality, just not reality. So, yes, we will continue to spend robustly. Our expectation of our friends, and we say this in solidarity, is you have to spend more on your defense, for your country, on that continent, understanding that the American military and the American people stand beside you as we have in NATO, but can't have the expectation of being the permanent guarantor, as I alluded to, from what even Eisenhower observed post-World War II. That shift has to happen. The peace dividend has to end. There are autocrats with ambitions around the globe, from Russia to the Communist Chinese. Either the West awakens to that reality and creates combat multipliers with their allies and partners, to include NATO, or we will abdicate that responsibility to somebody else with all the wrong values. You mentioned Europe. We have not said in any way that we're abandoning our allies in Europe. There have been no decisions based on troop levels. Again, that's a discussion to be had by the Commander-in-Chief in these high-stakes negotiations. And that would most likely come later on. But there is a recognition that the ambitions of the Communist Chinese are a threat to free people everywhere, to include America's interests in the Pacific. And it makes a lot of sense, just in a common sense way, to use our comparative advantages. European countries spending here in defense of this continent, in defense of allies here, against an aggressor on this continent with ambitions. That strikes me as the right place to invest. And I don't say that in a condescending way. I say that in a common sense, practical way. Investing in defense on the continent makes sense. We support that as well. It also makes sense comparatively and geographically for the United States, along with allies in the Pacific, like Japan and South Korea and the Philippines and Australia and others, to also invest in allies and partners and capabilities in the Pacific to project power there in service of deterrence. That deterrent effect in the Pacific is one that really can only be led by the United States. We wish we could lead everywhere at all times. We will stand in solidarity with allies and partners and encourage everyone to invest in order to have force multiplication of what we represent, but it requires realistic conversations. Those with disingenuous motives in the media, I don't mean to look at you, just saying anyone that suggests its abandonment are trying to drive a wedge between allies that does not exist.
Thank you, Mr. Producer.
We are committed to that NATO alliance.
And honestly, that right there, that's an important statement.
It's a fantastic way he laid it out.
Yes, and what he ended with, the division. That's ultimately the goal. It's to divide.
It's a lie. It is a lie that Trump is abandoning NATO, and it is and again, I hate using the word the deep state, but there is a group of people who do mean you ill.
Yes.
They do want a new world order. They do want to build this. They want to construct this new world reshaped in their own image, and they can't do it with their own ideas. Just like the LGBT issue, they have to recruit from that which is working to build their new world. And that's the issue. They can't build anything. You look at Europe. Europe is a dead end, even not just culturally, but genetically. And as a race, Europe is dying because of the bad ideas. Yep. Everything is just failing. The left wing of the Enlightenment was a mistake.
You're right, because they can't build their own ideas or their own culture, their own economy, and their own thing that works, like government ideas. And that's why they use something that's somebody else's idea.
They have to.
That's the only way to do it for them.
That's how Satan works.
Yes.
He cannot create something new.
The big lie.
He wants to transmute something that God has made that was good. That's what every sin is. It's a transmutation. It's a promise of something good that is natural, that God meant for your good. And it is a here, now, on my terms, my way, etc. And that is the essence of what sin is. So you look at the strong muscular response that America has provided worldwide. Trump is saying, you guys want to break down our way of life. You want to say that we should spend X amount of our GDP on socialized health care. Who's been providing your defense? Who's been the stopgap against Russia? And by the way, China is heating up. And you guys, if you're wondering why we opened this segment this way, there's something that a lot of people are missing. And it is seriously concerning how much money we've spent on Israel and Ukraine. Again, I'm generally pro-Israel, but the amount of resources that we've deployed in these wars that we didn't have to as Americans are affecting our interests. And you're actually seeing a serious concern in the Joint Chiefs and in those circles. Mr. Producer, pull this up. This is a news article from November of 24, where Command Admiral Samuel Paparo, geez, I'm afraid I butchered that. If you look right there, you're looking at billions of dollars that has been spent on the Russo-Ukraine war. And the problem is, we're concerned after 1,000 days, again, this is in November of 24, since Russia invaded, in this time frame, the U.S. has provided more than $60.4 billion in military assistance, including 3 Patriot air defense systems and missiles, more than 40 high-mobility artillery rocket systems and ammunition, and the coveted longer-range Army attack missile system, or the ATACMS, by the way, which Ukraine was pointing into Russia for no reason, which Ukraine deployed into Russia. You're looking at a serious issue with the stockpile of weapons. We should replenish those stocks and then some, Paparo said. I am already dissatisfied with the magazine depth. I am a little more dissatisfied. I'm already dissatisfied with the magazine depth. I'm a little more dissatisfied with the magazine depth, he said, referring to the numbers of munitions in reserve. So all that to say, we are at a deficit. He is the commanding admiral in the Indo-Pacific Fleet. What's he thinking about?
Oh, he's
defending what?
He's
Taiwan.
Well, not only Taiwan, but I think the ongoing defense of Israel is going to be front and center. You know what's? I was just thinking about this. I've always felt, this is Pomeroy opinion here, that Biden knew all along what he wanted to do in terms of our borders. He was very intentional. Again, this is my opinion. He was very intentional of allowing the borders to be so open. If you think about this, if he gives all the weapons that he sees in our stockpiles, is Biden a pro-defense strength guy?
No.
Absolutely not. What better way to take care of that strength look than to deplete your stockpile?
Mm-hmm.
So now when you look at what Trump is doing with regards to Doge and the money he's trying to save, guys, that's not really a savings per se. That's trying to recover some of the garbage that...
It's a stopping of the hemorrhaging.
It's a stopping of the hemorrhaging. It really is. So if everybody's looking for Rosie in another 6 months of the Trump administration, you might want to temper that just a little bit and think about how much damage has really been done by the Biden administration. And I'm not trying to quote unquote get out in front of the issue or potential issue. All I'm saying is I think there's been far more damage done to our economy,
correct,
than what we could possibly conceive in our minds.
Our economy and our strategic stockpile of oil, of munitions, and so...
And oil was the first thing to go.
And look, if China takes over Taiwan, the people who are benefiting from the mess that Doge is digging into right now, like the Biden crime family, you're going to see them rake in billions in kickbacks.
Yes.
So, yes, there is an agenda, and it is the weakening of our defense of Taiwan. And that is my tinfoil hat conspiracy theory for the day, is that you are weakening the United States. And it's a long-term goal, and they have strategically brought us to the point where a lot of the folks in the Indo-Pacific theater are concerned that we do not have the ability to mount a rapid response to Taiwan before all of the damage to the industry there would be catastrophic for America.
Well, you think about it. China's been increasing their presence around Taiwan.
Correct.
Whether it's aerial or by sea.
So what's
Either
Trump's,
way.
So what's Trump's response to this? Cut 17. Trump, there's a reason he's doing this.
I've had a good relationship with President Putin. I've had a good relationship with President Xi. It's about people. And I think when things straighten out, which I hope will be in the not-too-distant future, the meeting I want to have first is a meeting with China and a meeting with Russia on slowing down, stopping, and reducing nuclear weapons in particular, and also on not having to spend the kind of money we're all spending on weapons, military weapons generally.
I think my question is, would you have those meetings separately with each of those leaders, or would you try to bring them all together?
Both. You start off separately, and that's what was happening. I was dealing with President Putin. We had really an understanding where we were going to denuclearize. What a beautiful term that is, right? Denuclearize. What a great thing if we could do that. And we were going to, he really liked the idea, and so did I. And we had then called China, and China was very open to it. You know, I've had a good relationship with President Putin.
I'm not sure I ever see that happening, but...
Well, you know what? If there's a guy crazy enough to do it, it's Donald J.
Yes, Trump. It is.
Yeah, it is.
That man is a wild card. We don't know what he's going to do, but there's a reason why he's playing nice. And it's not because I don't think Trump's scared, but I think he's concerned.
Yes.
I think he's probably been told, if China does become an issue right now in Taiwan, we actually have a problem. So I think that's something that we are going to need to be very, very keenly aware of, and we have to recover as soon as possible. I'm glad that Doge is on the case.
And, you know, the thing is here we've got a president who's a businessman that has made some of the most unreal business deals in the world.
Let's see what he does. Let's see what he does.
I mean, the chance. You know what I mean? I mean, he makes some incredible deals.
America has needed for a long time a business-minded person.
Yes.
And not a political playing puppet.
Not a political hack.
Yes.
Correct.
Speaking of crazy things that I did not have on my 2025 bingo card, the Vice President of the United States debating the order of love in the public square.
Oh, my.
With the Pope.
With the Pope?
So we covered this a couple of weeks ago when J.D. Vance, had his interview with Margaret on Face the Nation. Frankly, Margaret, I don't care. Which is fantastic. Absolutely great way that he dealt with that. However, there's been a lot of backlash. So if you could throw up cut number 18, Mr. Producer. Yep. He comes back and he says, just Google the Ordo Amoris, or Amoris, depending on what you're talking about. Aside from that, the idea that there isn't a hierarchy of obligations violates basic common sense. Does Rory really think that his moral duties to his own children are the same as his duties to someone else? So, and then the Pope weighs in on this. And now, when the Pope weighs in on this, he says, but you have the Ordo Amoris wrong. The Ordo Amoris, the proper order is that you are, it's not a set of concentric circles of love. It's an issue of you have to love everyone. And so, by the way, they're both correct in a way. The Pope is not wrong that Augustine didn't specifically speak about concentric circles. But Vance is saying, Just look up the order of loves. There is a response. And so I want to go through this in a very Augustine way. We're going to look at the Bible, and we're going to look at it specifically, what the Bible says, starting with the first order. Yes, Steve.
In reference to that, when you're talking about the person that spoke for the Pope, I thought it was kind of interesting that the person that was the Pope's speaker says, well, you know, JD, you've only been a Catholic so for this many years, but the Pope has been a Catholic for however many years, so he knows a lot more than you. And I thought,
it's called what fallacy is that?
Oh,
Chat.
What is that?
What type of fallacy is that? That is a classic fallacy.
Oh,
one that is studied.
Gosh.
What is the fallacy that they are committing when they say, "Oh, you're not responsible enough. Oh, only the Pope. The Pope has been for this long." We're not even talking about papal authority, because this is ex cathedra. This is outside of the church. So the Pope in the Catholic doctrine has within the church has the final say on biblical interpretation, but this is ex cathedra. So what fallacy was just committed by these guys? I'm wondering if anyone is going to drop it, because I'm giving you 3 seconds. 2, it's the appeal to authority fallacy. The appeal to authority, saying just because someone is more experienced, more knowledgeable than you, without providing any additional proof, that is the appeal to authority fallacy. Expertology, says Remnant.
Pretty close.
That's the idea. It's expertology. It is a fallacy. It's the appeal to authority, the appeal that the authority somehow makes it true, which is just not the case. Nope. So let's look at what the Bible says. If you could bring up, love for God needs to be supreme. So pull up cut 19. Yep. Miss Nikki, can you get that for me?
You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment.
Awesome. So, okay. So love for God supreme. Go ahead and go to 20. Mr. Charlie, can you get this?
I cannot.
Don't worry about it. He's recovering from eye surgery. Okay. You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your might. This is what Jesus was referring to. Next one, and Steve, get this one.
If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple.
Now, a little bit of clarity on that.
Yes.
When you're looking at the Greek word, it's not speaking about a loathing. It's if you're not willing to forsake.
Correct.
That word is willingness to forsake in the Greek word. But you see a very strong set here for love for God supreme. Go ahead and go to cut 22, Mr. Producer. I believe. Is that the next one? You shall have no other gods before me. Okay, so we see a strong case that there's a central love. And again, we're abridging Augustine's argument here, the order of loves. You have this small circle. This is the most important thing, is the primary kernel is a love for God. Everything else will flow out from that. Mm-hmm. But let's see what the Bible says for a love for family, or for those near you. Family. Go ahead. That'd be the next one. Ms. Nikki.
Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her.
That's Ephesians 5:25. Ephesians 6:1-2. Mr. Steve.
Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise.
1 Timothy 5:8 says this, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives or family, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Okay, so we're getting a structure for the family. Okay, this is another thing. So, Miss Nikki, can you go ahead and get Genesis 2:24?
Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh.
So, again, we're going to attack this again. I'm oversimplifying the order of Amoris, but that's okay. You're looking at God as prime, and you need to be able to leave all these other connections. But these are critical connections as well. God doesn't double speak. He's saying you need to be capable of leaving these things, but this is the next level. This is the next to kind of defy the Pope just a little bit, His Eminence. This is the next concentric circle. Next is this, the love for community. Can you get that for me, Steve?
Yes. 19. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
Then we come to the parable of the Good Samaritan, okay? The problem with this is that, and we all know the parable of the Good Samaritan. Thank you, Mr. Producer. The problem with the parable of the Good Samaritan and using it in the way that His Eminence did, I'm just, with all the respect I can muster, he's saying that because this man was beaten by people who should not have been there, and he's on the side of the road, and he's been beaten up and left for dead, just because someone showed kindness to that man, and Jesus is saying the kindness of those close to you, you have to help. By the way, not some man in some other country, the guy right there on the side of the road. Within that circle, you have to help the people who beat the crap out of the man that you're helping instead of helping him. Instead of helping the man, you could easily, I know I'm stretching a little bit, but not that much. You're looking at a huge wave of crime. Flip this around just a little bit. Let's just say that those people were there illegally for a second, as many people who have been beaten and left on the side of the road are. You're advocating not for the protection of that man in his own country, in his own nation's rules. You're advocating for the people who are beating the man who's on the ground.
Sounds kind of like now where the criminal is the victim and the victim is the problem.
You know, here's the whole base is God does everything with decency and in order. For all who wish to be saved, all may be saved, but there's an order to it. You can't come up any other way except through Christ.
And Christ is an order of how He does that.
Yes. There's an order to everything. Open borders is not order. It's chaos.
Let's look at the Bible, and let's go to that. Let's not give our opinions here. Let's just go right to the Scripture. Miss Nikki, can you get cut 29, Jeremiah 29:7?
But seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare.
In its what? You'll find what?
In its welfare, you will find your welfare.
So in the benefit of the state in which you reside, you will find safety and benefit. That's interesting. Not necessarily a case, but Steve, go ahead.
Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God.
So we see a concentric circle. Again, the Ordo Amoris does not speak to this directly, but this is what J.D. Vance was getting at. We have a little bit more time, and we have more than 200 characters or whatever it is on Twitter to say this than J.D. Vance did in that one little bit. So let's look at 1 Peter 2:13. Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution. Later on in verse 17, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. That's interesting. It's almost like the laws of a nation are important. And by the way, in cathedra and ex cathedra, this pope has said exactly that. It makes you wonder if it's not a political football, with all due respect to His Eminence.
I was going to put in here that as a Christian, let me put it to you this way: we have to obey the laws of the land, right? So let's say that you, as a Christian, steal $5 and 20 years goes by, and you've never confessed or never repaid that person. Are you still obligated to go back and do that? And I'm saying that because there was my daughter was telling me of a story of somebody being angry at Trump because a friend who came here illegally 20 years ago, who is a Christian, is terrified of being deported.
Get legal as fast as you can.
That's what I'm my thought was, if she's a Christian and she's meant to be here, the Lord will see her through getting to be here legally, but you can't come illegally
and stay illegally.
Why has she waited 20 years?
Well, she came to, and I bet you anything, she is a good law-abiding individual.
I don't doubt it. But why has she waited 20 years?
And let's be clear, these aren't the people who we're even targeting at the moment.
It's not.
Get legal as fast as you can, because who are they targeting?
The criminal.
Military-aged men.
Yes.
Gang
people
members.
Who are in MS-13.
Right.
You have a bunch of Chinese nationals. Again, I have
Yeah.
nothing
I
against
trade
China.
a lot
I have
of
nothing
blood
against
or
China,
whatever you
except
call
they're
them.
one of the big. The Chi-Com party is one of the biggest threats to the existence of the United States of America and freedom in the world. And we have Chi-Com nationals who have been coming over the border, and they're military-aged men. These aren't cute little mamacitas with their child in a swaddle cloth. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about violent gang members. We're talking about military-aged men.
Hey, you got terrorists, got people from the Middle East that are here now.
So,
yes, you're right.
All of that to say, Tom Holman, and I was going to bring up this cut. I'm not going to do this to you, Mr. Producer. I'm not going to demand that you pull this up. But Tom Holman was asked, well, what do you think about the Pope saying this? And Tom Holman says, well, the Pope should really look at the Vatican and deal with the Vatican, because he's got a lot of problems there. Maybe he should deal with that and leave the immigration to us. I love Tom Holman. The guy is a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. I do think that there was a better way to do that, because that in and of itself is a inverse. It's sort of an appeal to authority fallacy. He kind of came at that. I think a better way to have approached that would have been, Your Eminence, are there laws about illegally, encroaching into the city-state of the Vatican? Mr. Producer, if you could pull that up. How much does it cost someone? Oh, 25,000 pounds if they intrude upon the Vatican. Oh, in 1 to 4 years in prison. If you had as many illegals in the city-state of the Vatican as we do here in America, Mr. Producer, what would you have to do?
Build more prisons.
Or export them, kind of like we're doing in America. So, you know what? Thank you, Mr. Producer. You and I,
more money.
Dear His Excellency, we have a common issue, don't we? Because you do deport illegal immigrants into the Vatican. You do deport people who are not there. And so, do you really believe what you say you believe, or are you acting as a partisan actor in politics? Maybe you should lead the Catholic Church the way that you live. And not in snark, but, I'm just saying, Your Eminence, and the highly unlikelihood that this, something like this would ever get to him, I'd say, Your Eminence, what are you living the way that Christ would have you live? Then why do you have a law against people coming into your city-state? And why do you charge them money if they come in? And you and I both know the answer to that, because you have every right to. So why does America not have that right? It's more than just a fallacy. It is partisan politics, and he does not believe that. Just carefully, laying that out. With all due respect to the Pope and to the papacy and to my Catholic brothers and sisters, I love you guys. I think that His Excellency is wrong. Any final thoughts on that before we move on to the next segment?
I would say, who is he listening to? What news station is he listening to? And the reason I say that is because Charlie and I were told a story yesterday of somebody who decided to go gambling, and it was on a reservation. And it was a Native American Indian that he said, well, how's your day going? She goes, well, not too good. And he goes, well, what's wrong? She goes, and she started complaining about Trump. And she said, I'm so worried about getting deported.
This is a Native American Indian.
He said, do you have a birth certificate? And she goes, yes. He goes, do you have a social security number? She goes, yes. And he goes, where are they going to deport you to? And she didn't answer that. And he was trying to explain to her, you are an American. You're an American. You're born here. They can't deport you to any place. This is where you were born. And she didn't get it. And she said everybody that worked there was afraid they were going to be deported. And he said, who do you listen to? What news station? And she said, CNN.
Oh, that's why. She's one of the five people.
You know,
which
with the one thing on this, allowing all of these military-aged men to come into this country kind of sounds almost like they're building up a foreign military in our own country, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
We have our own OP4. And so it is, again,
foreign country
tinfoil hat moment, but they want to see.
Let me grab it.
They want to see the failure of the United States. So speaking of failures in the United States, or at least kerfuffles, brings us to our next segment.
Ooh.
Mr. Producer, Nikki knows facts. Question to the chat. When, where, and who was the first woman elected to Congress in the United States of America? When, where, and who was the first woman elected to Congress?
Now, I have to say...
Thank you, Mr. Producer. Take it off.
When she initially asked me this, I thought there was a black congresswoman out of Alabama, and I thought it was her. That was, I want to say early 70s is when that was. Obviously, I was wrong. I was way off.
By a couple of decades.
More than that.
Yeah.
Yes.
More than that. Yep.
So, who, where, why, when, and how, Miss Nikki?
Actually, the first woman elected to the House of Representatives was from Montana.
What?
And her name is Jeanette Rankin, and she was born June 11th in 1880. She died May 18th in 1973. She was elected in 1916. But I want to give you a little bit of background on her, because I always do. She was born to a school teacher and a wealthy mill owner. And the reason I want to bring that up, because her sister and brother have amazing stories here. She was the oldest of 5 sisters and 1 brother. Now, she earned a Bachelor of Science degree in biology in 1902. So you see, she's already expanded doing things that most women did not do. Her brother Wellington became Montana's Attorney General and later a justice on the Montana Supreme Court. I should say the Supreme Court in Montana. Her sister, Edna Rankin, became the first Montana-born woman to pass the bar exam in Montana. And between 1909 and 1910, Jeanette became involved in the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which became the president in 1911. She was the first woman to speak before the Montana legislature in support of a woman's right to vote.
Which is going to be important in a little bit.
It's very important. Now, did you realize in 1914 that Montana became the 7th state that allowed women to vote?
So suffrage is in full swing, and we finally get our first woman, elected to Congress.
Yes.
And just a few years later.
And
yes.
This was before suffrage. Was she?
Well, this is before the 19th Amendment.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So some states were already allowing women to vote, but it wasn't a constitutional amendment. Yes. Okay. So she runs in 1917 or 1916 is actually when she had to run. And I want you to understand something. This is Montana. Montana, even today, is not well populated. It's very scattered. So she had to travel
I can tell you that.
Over the country, throughout the countryside of Montana, to promote herself, to become elected. She was part of the Montana Republican Party. She was a progressive. Mm-hmm. By the way, did you realize the Republican Party used to be considered progressive?
Mm-hmm.
It was very interesting.
On some things.
Yes, and she supported a lot of social welfare and things of that nature. Yep. Okay, so she's elected to the U.S. House of Representatives as a Republican from Montana in 1916 for 1 term. Now, this is interesting because during her victory speech, and this is very important, understand this, I am deeply conscious of the responsibility resting upon me. So this is a single woman in the early 1900s.
She's what?
Single.
Keep going. Single.
Mm-hmm.
And she did all of this single?
Yes.
Wow.
Now, do you realize World War I began in Europe in 1914? So she's taken her first term in 1916. Now, there was a lot of talk at that time about America becoming involved in World War I. And, of course, nobody really wants to get involved in a war. The only reason you're talking about being involved is to prevent protection of your country later on. So during this time, President Woodrow Wilson has a speech, and his speech is to make the world safe for democracy. And he goes to Congress and he asks for a declaration of war. That was on April 2nd, 1917. And Rankin, along with 49 others, voted no. She said, I wish to stand for my country, but I cannot vote for war. You know what? I'm not upset about that one. I am. I'm because
she couldn't go to war.
No. You're getting ahead of me.
Am I getting ahead of you?
This is World War I.
This is World War I.
This is her first term. She's actually going to run again in 1940. Okay, and so, she did receive a lot of criticism. By the way, did you know in World War I, 16 million people were killed? 16 million people. That's awful.
The war to end all wars, they said.
Yes.
They were wrong.
Now, in 1917, women had been granted some form of voting rights in about 40 states. She continues to lead this movement to get women the right to vote throughout the country. And in 1918, she was on a committee for women's suffrage, and she presented it to Congress. And they voted on it, and it was passed in the House, but it was defeated in the Senate. Now, the following year, after her term ended, the same resolution passed in both chambers, and it was the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which, you know what, I'm very happy about. I'm very, very happy. Now, after she leaves Congress, she worked as a field secretary for the National Consumers League and as a lobbyist for various pacifist organizations. My husband right now is just cringing.
I'm just seething at the moment.
So if you do not know what a pacifist is, it's someone who opposes war or violence as a means of settling disputes. You know what? That would be a wonderful world if we could live there. That would be wonderful. And I think that's the way we want to teach our children.
Yep.
To be nice and try to settle things.
Knuckles out.
I heard you the first three.
Yes. We have I don't know if you're going to put the picture up there, but she actually went and argued before the House Naval Affairs Committee in 1939 against the fortification of Guam. Now it's 1939, okay? You got to pay attention to what's going on in history. She decides to run again in 1940, and she does win. And as she is takes her seat, she's appointed to the Committee of Public Lands and the Committee on Insular Affairs. 1940. Do you know what happened in 1939? Hitler invaded Poland. It's the beginning of World War II. She's back in the House of Congress. Again. Yes, she is.
Goodness.
And I think I got 2 pages here. Yep. I sure did.
There's your photos up there. Yep.
Okay.
We had Pearl Harbor hit. And what did she vote?
Did she ever get married?
She did not get married.
Yeah, I don't blame
So remember, there's a lot of things going on over in Europe. And, of course, the world is upset again. You know, we're talking about war. And then December 7th, 1941 hits. And Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. The next day, we have the famous speech by FDR on the Day of Infamy speech.
Yep.
December 8th, Jeanette Rankin is the only member of Congress to vote against.
The only member of Congress
to vote against going to war after a blatant attack. And what was her reasoning?
She said, as a woman, I can't go to war. And I refuse to send anyone else. This is where I started having a problem.
Then why did we give you the right to vote? Which is a real question. Yep. And by the way, I do believe it's disordered for a society to send women to go and die for the men.
Hello?
I think that it is only
Correct.
It is only a good and worthwhile system if men are capable of defending the home and the hearth and the woman and the children. So there is a real question about people being able to vote for a war that they shouldn't be in. And it's an interesting circle to square. I won't do that today, but it is an interesting thing.
Well, this is where I had problems. I will tell you that when she voted, she was actually hissed at when she was making her vote. She had a slew of reporters chase her down, and she had to hide in a telephone booth. She had to call the Capitol Police to escort her to her office, where she received many telegrams and phone calls. Yes, her brother from Montana sent her a telegram and said, Montana is 100% against you. And she knew her political career was over with.
She lost it.
Yeah,
so
she did.
It's an interesting story. It's kind of a loss of credibility there when you do that.
You know, and I don't have a problem with somebody voting their conscience. That good for her to stand up against that kind of thing. But here's the thing. That vote makes absolutely no sense whatsoever.
If you're going to vote, if you're going to be elected, you have to be able to go to war. And that's right. Been my thing. If you're running for Congress, it's not for the glory, it's not for the pleasure, you're being called upon to make wise decisions on behalf of the country.
I think,
but now it's for the money.
I think Americans would be very wise to remember one thing. There is only one currency to pay for war. One. Mm-hmm. And it's not paper. It's blood. In the words of Pete Hegseth, we didn't play this clip, but he said in the beginning of his speech to NATO. So if you guys go look at that up, by the way, we'll be on Rumble at Further every day and on YouTube and anywhere podcasts can be found. You'll find a bibliography of what we've been listening to. At the beginning of that speech, Pete Hegseth said, "You cannot fire strong words. You cannot fire flags at an enemy. You cannot fire your resolve and and our solidarity with you is not something that can be fired. And we're calling on Europe to defend itself because we have a real issue with communist China, and we have depleted our resources fighting your war on your continent, spending extra money. There's only one place that the U.S. is really like obligatorily confined to defending, and that is the Indo-Pacific area. There is no one else in that zone, and Europe is more than capable of paying for their own defense, yet they don't. And that was the purpose of NATO. It wasn't us dropping NATO. It was saying we have to defend. So when you have to be able to say more than just I don't like the Japanese. You have to vote. You have to say I don't like what the Japanese did at Pearl Harbor, but I can't vote because I have this more. She deserved to be booed and hissed. Amen.
Out.
You know, she did.
She deserved that. So, any other thoughts before we go on to the book corner? We are on the final round here. The book corner. By the way, we're starting a new thing. So tell us in the comment section if you like this or don't like this.
There's a question there I'd really like to answer, but I don't know.
You know what? There were two questions. Someone said something about these guys care way too. Cold Steel said these guys care way too much what the Catholics say. I am much less concerned with what the Pope has to say, and I'm much more concerned with what my Catholic brothers and sisters see, think, and hear. As an apologetics guy, someone who believes in being winsome, to those in a different denomination of the faith. And yes, I do believe I am not a Protestant. I attend evangelical. As someone in that camp, I do not believe that there are, being a Catholic, going to Catholic church does not prevent you from knowing Jesus Christ as Lord, Savior, Master entirely. I am not here to be a stumbling block. And so that is why I am careful what I say about my Catholic brothers and sisters, even if I do not agree with the Pope. By the way, Petros, or Simon Bar-Jonah, you're now named Petros, masculine, Simon Bar-Jonah, masculine. Petros, on this Petros, I will build the church, also feminine. Sorry, apostolic succession and the papacy being based on Peter. Not a strong argument. I have a lot more for you on that, but that's not what we're talking about. We're going to move on to the book corner, unless you got one other one. Was that the one you were looking at?
No.
What's the one you want to get?
I was looking at one that says, want to stop wars? What if Hitler was standing on a hill alone? Well, I'd shoot him in the head. It'd be over.
Okay.
You would if you
Easy answer. Easy answer. Easy answer.
Think about it.
I did.
Bam.
Easy answer.
Done. Over.
So
no more war.
Tell us what you guys think about the book corner. But we wanted to expose some people have not heard of some of these more obscure C.S. Lewis writings, and there's a few others. We might do The Origin of Religion by Samuel Schwimmer. We might do the Screwtape Letters. But today, we're starting with what might be my favorite work of Lewis. And I've read quite a few of his works. I really, really do enjoy his stuff. We're starting the book corner with The Great Divorce. And we're going to start with the foreword, chapters 1 and 2. So next cut, Mr. Producer, if you would. We're going to do a quick overview. So the Great Divorce, what was it about? Well, in short summary, you're looking at a book that is an allegory. It was an allegorical representation of heaven and hell, or purgatory and hell, as they might be if God's final judgment was not final. If parole was available and God allowed the dissidents of hell to ascend to heaven for a holiday, to sit on the cusp of the beauty and majesty and be wooed by angelic and sanctified beings, what would the pathologies bear out? What would the sinful nature of man do when cut off from God's grace? And I think it's a fantastic book.
Yeah, and the one thing I wanted to bring up here, John Arthur, is that C.S. Lewis, this is his style of writing, using allegory. And so when you read him, it would do you well to kind of remember that. Also, C.S. Lewis was a deep thinker, and he come out of a time of deep thinkers. When you think about the Tolkiens and so on, the Francis Schaeffers, these were deep thinking men, and not always Christian. And that's what makes them really interesting to look at. So C.S. Lewis is, I think collectively, this panel right here would absolutely recommend any of his work as a means to really deepen your understanding of things.
It's not the scripture, but I believe it is interesting and well spoken.
Yeah.
So this week we read the foreword in the first 2 chapters. So I want to get y'all's thoughts on the foreword. Mr. Producer, if you could pull that out for me. Yep. So, and the next one. Go ahead and move on to the next one. Yep. And get me the foreword. There we go. So, in the foreword, C.S. Lewis takes great pains to lay out that the Great Divorce is an allegory. It's not a theological treatise. It should not be taken as a literal depiction of the afterlife in his theology. However, he argues against the idea that good and evil can be reconciled, emphasizing that one must fully choose either heaven or hell. There is no blending of the two. He also goes and mentions that he does have inspiration from William Blake's The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, but clarifies that the book is meant to show their absolute separation rather than the unity. All of that to say, he's laying it out saying this is a thought experiment. So if you decide to read this, and I've sent people the Screwtape Letters and the Great Divorce, people look at me and say, what did you send me to read? I have no idea what this means. It all just goes over my head. So a little bit of explanation is interesting. If you've ever wondered, how can a good God allow hell to exist? This is a thought experiment that really plays out. And we're going to be going over the upcoming chapters, and we're going to look at the pathologies of each one of these individuals. And we're going to kind of play it out and read along with you. If you guys want to start, you can find the audiobooks for free, and it makes for a great commute. They're on YouTube or anywhere audiobooks are found if you have a subscription like Audible, which is where I believe where y'all listen to it.
I listen on Everand, which used to be Scribd.
Okay. So in chapter 1, we see that the narrator is in a grim, gray town, as it said. Thank you, Mr. Producer. Go ahead and put that up there. And he is in basically hell or purgatory. Now, he joins a line or a queue for a bus that promises to take people away from the gray city or the gray town. As he waits, he observes the other passengers arguing and bickering, expressing general dissatisfaction. These people, it seems, are unhappy but reluctant to leave, preferring their own grievances and pride over the change. When the bus arrives, it appears unusual, bright, and floating above the ground. Now, what were y'all's thoughts when you read chapter 1?
I have to be honest with you.
It's a wild read.
I was like, okay, this is interesting, but I don't know what's happening here. Mm-hmm. I don't know. And so I actually had to get on YouTube and listen to a summary of somebody else who read the book.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my husband, of course, he's a little more intuitive than I am, but...
What were your thoughts?
I'm like, okay, I'd like to see what happens next.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So go ahead.
I kind of read, I had to read to started reading and I'm like, oh, I'm in chapter 4. And I was like,
you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And I was like, man, wait a second. Now I'm getting an idea of what's going on.
Now I will say that Charlie and I talked about this. We're listening to it together. Reading it, I think
is better.
It's probably better.
That.
Yes, I think that's
a great book.
And once I started to read past chapter 2, I started to really grasp,
lock in,
and understand what was going on. And then I was like, oh, okay. But the first 2, I was kind of like, what in the world is John Arthur having me read?
So you'll have the same experience, but let me read a part of the first chapter, just a paragraph here, because I do think it's interesting. So these people are fighting in the queue. People are cheating each other out of the line, the line. They're cheating each other out of the line, and they're beating each other up, and they're all heckling to get onto this bus, which the narrator doesn't know where it goes yet, but we know that it's this hypothetical bus trip to heaven, a holiday to heaven, to the edges of where heaven and hell meet. And so this other gentleman comes up to him after this kerfuffle. This person's thrown to the ground and beaten out of the line. This gentleman walks up and says, I thought you wouldn't mind my tacking on with you, my clinging on to you, for I've noticed that you feel just as I do about the present company. Why on earth they insist on coming, I can't imagine. They won't like it at all when they get there to heaven, and they'd really be much more comfortable at home. It's different for you and for me. And this is where we start to see the brilliant wit of Lewis laying out how we see other people's sins before we see our own.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And so, do they like the place, I asked. As much as they'd like anything, he answered. They've got cinemas and fish and chip shops and advertisements and all sorts of things they want. The appalling lack of any intellectual life down here doesn't worry them. I realized as soon as I got here that there'd been some sort of mistake. I ought to have been taken to heaven. But I fooled around trying to wake up people here, and, he's being a good civic servant here. I found a few fellows I'd known and tried to form a little circle, but they've all seemed to sunk to the level of their surroundings. So Lewis is playing this game of wit, and it rhymes with some of the own mental pathologies that go with man's arrogance. And this man goes on
everybody's
says,
messing up except me.
I tried to get them to read my most recent book, but they wouldn't have any of it, right? And so, do you want to read it? And the narrator goes, I forgot my spectacles.
Yeah.
Don't bother me. It moves on. So we have this scene setting, and we start to see some of this world building that Lewis is doing, where he's building this scenario of a thought experiment of what it would look like to see someone who's unregenerate faced with this dark, dreary, purgatory-esque world, and one that gets progressively more lonely the time that you're there. Okay. Then in the second chapter, the bus starts to move, and another man pops up, this tousled-head poet, who he kind of butts into the conversation. And of course, the poet was never well known or never well loved. This is going to be cut 44, Mr. Producer. Pull this up. He appeared a singularly ill-used man. His parents had never appreciated him, and none of the 5 schools at which he'd been educated seemed to have made any provision for a talent and temperament such as his. To make matters worse, he had been exactly the sort of boy in whose case the examination system works out with the maximum unfairness and absurdity. It was not until he reached the university that he began to recognize that all of these injustices did not come upon him by chance, but were the inevitable results of our economic system. Capitalism did not merely enslave the workers, it also vitalized taste and vulgarized intellect. Here, our educational system, and hence the lack of quote-unquote recognition for new genius. This discovery made him a communist. So all that to say, just to tease the chapter, really, really good read. And as you start to read, you'll pick up that Lewis is trying to write as much as possible from the frame of mind of someone who really believes these things.
Is he that? It sounded almost like that California liberal professor I heard about a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's I don't know. You'll see
just
also
kind of an idea.
You'll also see some the people who think about the human condition as something that is a consequence of their natural surroundings. Mm-hmm. So you have the intelligent man. And I don't know if you want to read this, Miss Nikki, but if not, I can. Go ahead and throw it up there, Mr. Producer. It's the last cut 45. So this is the intelligent man.
Oh, okay.
So he says,
"What's the trouble about this place? Not that people are quarrelsome. That's only human nature and was always the same, even on Earth. The trouble is they have no needs. You get everything you want. Not very good quality, of course. By just imagining it. That's why it never cost any trouble to move to another street or build another house. In other words, there's no proper economic basis for any community life. If they needed real shops, chaps would just have to stay near where the real shops were. If they needed real houses, they'd have to stay near where builders were. It's scarcity that enables a society to exist."
So if you're not picking up what Lewis is putting down here, man is just a creature of his surroundings. And if only we built the right sort of civilization, man could flourish, even in the depths of hell. But instead, what man naturally does is grows further and further apart. And there's even a little anecdote from the intelligent man in the book where he says some folks, actually one of the first ones here was Napoleon, at least as far as we know, because there's so much further. They spent 15,000 years traveling of your time or of man's time, earthly time, to go to meet Napoleon. And he had built this huge mansion far enough away from everyone else, and there were successive mansions along the way, and he's just getting further and further away from people because no one can share in brotherly love. The whole idea about the rock stars, I'll party with the rock stars and my friends in hell. So Lewis kind of plays, and he goes into describe why Lewis believes that would be the case, even in a purgatory type system and not in a hell system, as if you believe in a literal hell, as we do here. Lewis is saying even if it were a purgatory-esque system where there was no weeping and gnashing of teeth, as you see the hailfire and brimstone of really what Christ spoke to and what you see in Revelations 14, you would still see men drift further and further apart when they're not in God's grace and his light.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Any thoughts from that?
You've summed it up really well. And I think it's going to be good to move into the next couple of chapters.
I think so, too. It's going to be interesting.
And we would encourage you out there that are watching or listening, take a look at these.
Yes.
They will open your mind.
So tell us in the comment section if you enjoyed the book corner as an addition. We're just adding that on there. And then I wanted to add, just in closing, I wanted to add a final apologetics moment. Mm-hmm. So Apologetics 101 is kind of what I wanted to call this segment. 3 rules for apologetics. And what apologetics are, if you're curious and if you haven't heard us say this before, we're not apologizing for anything. The apologia is to give a defense. It's what the Apostle Peter commanded us. He says, be ready to give a defense. And the word apologia means a written response to believe what you believe. And to the dear friend in the comment section who said, the problem is with treating, the problem is with the Pope is my Catholic brothers and sisters listen to their priests, and sometimes they follow the Pope's politics. That is the reason for apologetics.
Amen.
That is the reason for what we're doing here. We're saying here are some, if entertainment can follow with good thoughts that you're ready to, you've heard an argument, you're ready to give something off the cuff. Hopefully that's of value to you. Hopefully you can walk away and say to your Catholic brothers and sisters, your Catholic friends, and say, hey, the Pope does have a wall. And not only does he have a wall, he charges £25,000 for people who illegally, invade the Vatican city-state. And by the way, they put him in prison for up to 1 to 4 years. So what is the Pope saying when he says that America doesn't have the right? And we're specifically targeting gang members and military-aged men who are potentially an Op-4 in our country. So what does the Pope mean by that? Having that response, hoping that you guys will get that response and be able to share that with others. If you've heard it vocalized, it might be helpful. So 3 rules of apologetics. First, define terms.
You have to. It is the most important. Well, I could argue this one way or the other. It is an extremely important aspect of apologetics. If you do not operate from the same definition of terms, and by the way, can I just say this? Republicans have not operated from the same definition of terms over the last 30, 40 years.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. They allow the other side to dictate the terms and change them in mid-sentence. That's wrong.
Do not allow it. And that's why I've had people say, well, what do you mean you want to define the term? It says, I want to be very sure that we're talking about the same thing.
So let's give a real quick example.
You got 60 seconds.
If we're talking about transgender, define what a transgender is.
Yes.
I mean, okay, you're sitting there and you're going, I already know. Well, are you operating from the same definition of the other person?
Correct.
So.
Correct. Make sure that we are speaking on the same terms. Number 2.
That was 62 seconds.
Answer the question. No, sorry, don't answer the question. Answer the questioner. And what I mean by that is, if someone is asking, how can you possibly allow Donald J. Trump, or how can you be on the side of Donald J. Trump deporting people? And so that's why I say, we're not talking about Mamacita. We're not talking about those people right now. In fact, I believe that there should be a response for those people. There should be a way to, if someone, it's going to have to be a high bar. It's going to be a very high bar. But to be able to get an expedited citizenship, I think that's reasonable to look at that, to at least consider it.
To debate it.
It has to be a high bar.
The woman that's been here 20 years, I would like to, she's a law-abiding citizen.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, let's.
But that's not who we're talking about. We're talking about people who are in Guantanamo Bay. We're talking about people who are in prisons. We're talking about people who've committed, horrible atrocities. So be able to answer the questioner.
Correct.
And then finally, remember who wins the person's soul. Who wins the person's soul? Is that you?
It's not up to us.
That's a relief, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you would, and I would probably add one more very important thing, and that is to listen to people.
Yep.
You need to listen. But at the end of the day, it's not up to you to quote unquote win the argument. It's just not. At the end of the day, it's up to the Holy Spirit to move on that person's heart to convince them, or shall we say, to convict them that they may be wrong. That's where it's at. And equally important with all of this, don't come across in a condemning way. We can be strong in some of the things that we say on here, and we get that. We're not trying to condemn people. What we're trying to do is use thought to influence, to persuade. And when we look at 1 Peter 3:15 and we look at that word apologia, we're talking about going into court. Courtrooms are not like you see on TV. Not even close. Yes, there are some times when there's some pretty hot action in the courtroom, but that's with a person getting out of hand, and it doesn't last. The courtroom has a lot of decorum. Mm-hmm. And the judge will make sure it stays that way. And when we talk and we give an answer of the hope which lies within us, do it with good decorum. Don't get heated and out of control. It's not up to you to win the argument.
Indeed. So just remember that as you're going forward this week. My question to you is, if you're a Christian, when was the last time you shared the gospel with someone? When was the last time you shared the gospel with someone? And by the way, it doesn't have to be some crazy thing. It can literally be, God bless you, on the way out the door at the supermarket, or how are you doing? Because I've seen amazing doors open when you're open and when you're listening. When was the last time we talk about revival as though it's this thing in the third party tense, right? It's always, we need revival in America. We need a revival here in the United States. I'll tell you what, the first and second Great Awakenings didn't start with those people. It started with this person, right? It started with the individual on the individual level. So when was the last time that you actually spoke to someone about what really matters? That's something I want to leave you with this week. Hey, there you go.
What's interesting is that, I do Uber a lot, and I've become known with some friends of mine that one of my mission fields is talking with Uber drivers about Jesus Christ. And I do it all the time. All they got to do is give me just a small opening. If the Holy Spirit gives me a little opening about it, that's it. And the conversation goes, man, and then we talking about Jesus.
And so it can be politics, it can be culture, but you know what? I find that talking about politics and religion is a good thing. And you talk about it in public, guess what? You can see a lot of difference. And someone one time asked me, how can you talk about this much Jesus at work? And I said, sir, these people need Jesus more than I need my job. Correct. And that's not anything special. I'm saying it's just true. So just remember, be about God's business, be intelligent in being able to defend and be informed about being able to defend the actions of the conservative movement as it currently stands and the change that it's making in the world. And be prepared to see some interesting stuff. People are longing for orthodoxy. They're longing for righteousness.
Right.
With that said, thank you so much for being here.